Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, it is that time again.
To make bubbles with our spit?
No. It's time to review 10 more Peanut specials. Now we're entering a very unique period in Peanuts. There's not really any here that many would classify as classic Peanuts, not really ones that are household names or anything like that, probably due to a lack of holiday specials, barring one. But of course, just because something isn't popular or well-known, that doesn't automatically mean it's bad. So maybe we'll find ourselves a gem in here. This one is also interesting for me in particular, because it featured Peanut specials that I have never seen before. Is there one that will surprise me? Maybe, maybe no, but there's only one way to find out. But before we get started, as always, a quick thank you to my patrons over on Patreon. And if you enjoy the content I make and would like to offer your support, then for as little as $1 a month, you can get your name listed right here at the start of every video. Link to that is in the description below. Alright, let's waste no more time. Let's just dive right in. It's magic, Charlie Brown. Oh, we're starting off with a real ripe one this time. There's a lot to unpack, so let's start with probably the most obvious thing. There is just something that is distinctly off about the Peanuts having a concept like Snoopy turning Charlie Brown invisible, like with real magic. Now, did fantastical things happen in Peanuts before? Sure, mostly courtesy of Snoopy, but the difference is that those things were largely incidental and were usually catalyst for jokes. This is a crucial plot element. And by and large, the Peanut stories are more down-to-earth stories, and this kind of plot just doesn't really fit in this universe. And it's not even magic like Snoopy just so happened to have the book he learned it from in the doghouse, so that we can try to imagine where he got it. Like, maybe he got it from a flea market, or a wizard, or even if it was just a mystery or something. Instead, the book was just sitting in the public library. So, yeah, it turns out you can learn real magic with a single visit to your local library. It also really doesn't help that the other characters don't exactly have the strongest reactions to the news that Charlie Brown is invisible. Like, Sally just kinda accepts it without much thought and then randomly decides that she's moving into his room. These characters are not acting like this is some earth-shattering revelation. They're just so incredibly blasé over what should really be a much bigger deal than they're treating it as. So right away, there's a problem with the core concept in and of itself. But even setting that aside, what exactly can you really do with this? Charlie Brown is invisible. Awesome. How are you going to utilize it? There's what he does with Lucy and the football, which we'll come back to in a second. I want to save that for the end. But what else can you do? They spend a lot of time on an unfunny gag of Snoopy just trying to cover up Charlie Brown with mud and a bedsheet, and Charlie Brown at one point misses a step and falls down, which might be funny, except we can't see it, so you're just watching a screen with nothing moving while a scream sound effect is played over it. I almost kind of feel like it would be funnier if Charlie Brown just went about his everyday life and nobody noticed a difference. Almost making the point that Charlie Brown's invisible even when he's visible. You could maybe get some comedy out of that. It's almost like they started to kinda do both, but they don't really commit to either one. So what they're trying to do is kinda half-baked. Now, to be absolutely fair, this section really only covers the second half of the special. The first half is mostly devoted to Snoopy putting on a magic show for the neighborhood kids. This part isn't great either, but it at least feels like something that you would see in Peanuts. The biggest problem with this section is really the lack of consistency. Sometimes Snoopy is woefully incompetent as a magician, sometimes he does pull off a genuine trick, sometimes the stupidity of the audience makes a trick seem far more impressive than it actually is, and of course at the end he does genuinely make Charlie Brown disappear. But, if nothing else, we do get to see Snoopy abuse some children, or really one child in particular, which is always fun to see. Don't take that the wrong way. And there is the magic bit with Peppermint Patty that actually is rather amusing, plus Linus's reaction to Snoopy destroying his blanket is good. Okay, I think that's it. I don't think I'm missing anything else that important about this special. Oh yeah, now I remember. This is the very first special that features the cat next door from the comics, known by the name World War II. I was wondering when they were finally going to include him, and I'm so glad that they did. Someday you'll find her, Charlie Brown. This special is okay, I'll talk about the elephant in the room. So what is perhaps most infamous about this special in particular is that this is the special where Charlie Brown finally kicks the football. Kinda. Yeah, Lucy is just sitting there holding the football in a place kick position for some reason, and Charlie Brown, being invisible, runs up and kicks it. Then he forces Lucy to hold it and then kicks it again. And I should note that it is satisfying to see Charlie Brown kick the... okay, maybe see isn't the right word because Charlie Brown's invisible. You get the picture. And they are utilizing Charlie Brown's invisibility in a way that does make sense for the character to do. So I will give them credit there. Like I said, the problem is that it took a fantastical storyline like Charlie Brown becoming invisible in order for us to even get it. Maybe that's supposed to be a meta joke about how the only way Charlie Brown was going to ever kick that football was if something completely off the wall happened, but I'm probably doing that thing where I think too hard about something the writers didn't intend. And I do need to mention that Charles Schultz always said he saw the specials as being non-canon to the strips. So it is technically still accurate to say that Charlie Brown didn't kick the football, if you're talking just about the strips. But back to the special itself, it is definitely totally watchable. And I think your tolerance for it is going to be based on whether or not you can accept the core concept. I couldn't really look past it, but I could see it working just fine for others. Someday you'll find her, Charlie Brown. Remember how I said in my You're in Love Charlie Brown review that Charlie Brown came off as an obsessive stalker at times? Turns out that was foreshadowing for this special. I want you to just listen to what this special is about and tell me if this sounds just a little bit off. Charlie Brown is watching a football game on TV at home. Then, during one of the crowd shots, or honey shots as they say repeatedly throughout the special, he spots a little girl at the game. He randomly decides that just from this 2 seconds that she's the most beautiful girl he's ever seen, and decides he needs to meet her because he's fallen madly in love with her. Like, madly in love with her. Like, he's become so obsessed with her that he'll go crazy if he never meets her. So he drags Linus all across town trying to find her, making Linus do pretty much all of the work, I might add, before they finally track her down by finding out where she lives. Like, I don't need to explain that this is textbook stalking behavior, right? I know they're just kids, but still, this is stalking. And the way that Charlie Brown keeps going on and on about her like he's obsessed with her, he's fallen madly in love with her, he knows that she's the one for him, despite the fact that he's never even met her, really comes off as far creepier than the creators intended. And it's even harder to have an ounce of sympathy for him when he forces Linus to do all the heavy lifting in their journey, making him do all the asking questions, all the talking on the phone, etc. And then gets mad at Linus when he winds up falling in love with her. Gee, Charlie Brown, maybe you should have been a little bit more proactive here and this wouldn't have happened. Although it probably is a good thing that it happened because it does seem like Linus and the little girl do have a lot in common. And maybe if that was the point, like if Charlie Brown was being punished or something, or if it was about him accepting that you can't fall in love with someone just from looks alone, or if they're in love with someone else and you need to learn to let them go, then that would make sense. But this special doesn't seem to be that self-aware because by the end, it does expect you to have some level of sympathy for Charlie Brown here. But really, this is one of his least sympathetic portrayals. The way he bosses Linus around here, the way he loses his patience with him, and even his sense of entitlement near the end are really difficult to make likable. He even says that he saw her first, as if that somehow entitles him to a chance with the little girl, despite the fact that he's never even met her. Charlie Brown actually comes across as an incel here. Like, point for point, if you aged him up and didn't change a single thing, this would be textbook. And I know, he's a kid and kids can act like this. But this is a story. And if you're asking us to sympathize with him even after all he's done in the special, that's a pretty tough sell. Even setting that aside, what exactly does this special consist of? It's just Charlie Brown and Linus walking around town trying to find this girl. Linus will ask somebody questions while Charlie Brown just stands off to the side, not doing anything. They think they found her, but it turns out the princess is in another castle. There's nothing funny, smart, insightful, or really anything here. And Snoopy and Woodstock tag along, for some reason, probably to inject some comic relief into what's a pretty dull story. And even somehow manages to wind up crossing paths with Charlie Brown and Linus again after getting separated, despite the fact they're now well out of town. What a coincidence there. There's just nothing of substance here. And I'm not even 100% sure what they were even trying to accomplish. While I will say that It's Your First Kiss, Charlie Brown still contains the most frustrating moment in these specials so far, this is the worst one as a whole so far because it's the least good. Well, good grief, we're not off to the best of starts so far. It can only go uphill from here, right? A Charlie Brown celebration. And now, for the first time, rather than having an overarching narrative from beginning to end, this special just cuts out the middleman and just directly adapts several different strips or story arcs from the strips verbatim. Now, this certainly isn't the first time they adapted strips into these specials. Obviously, this was something that was done as far back as A Charlie Brown Christmas. But I believe this is the first special in which pretty much the entire thing consists of nothing but adapted comic strips. And not only that, but this is also the first hour-long Peanuts special. So there are a few reactions that one could have to this one in particular. On one hand, you could complain about that because, well, if you wanted to read the comics, you could just read the comics. Although back when the special first aired, doing so was significantly harder than it is now. You could also make the argument that the special is lazy because, like I said, the hard work is already done. You don't have to work hard at writing a story around the strips. You just need to select some pre-existing strips and story arcs and you're basically done. But on the other hand, if you are one of those people that does just want to experience something with these classic characters, even if it is something that is more or less recycling strips and setting them to animation, then you'll like this. And in this instance, the longer runtime would actually be a good thing because, well, that's all the more time that you're spending with these characters. Also, let's be honest, given how the last 3 specials worked out, they weren't exactly doing their best at telling their own stories. So at this point, just going back to basics actually feels like a breath of fresh air. Now, obviously, there are issues as you would expect. Sometimes lines of dialogue are awkwardly repeated because that's the way they were phrased in the strips. Because in a story arc in the comic strip that could last weeks, you would sometimes need to reestablish something to the audience in a way that you really don't in animation. Especially in a story that only lasts 5 minutes. And some of these story arcs really do work better as a strip. The story arc where Lucy throws Schroeder's piano down the sewer really is one of those story arcs that doesn't work that well in animation because the pacing of it just feels off. Not only that, but because Snoopy is mute in the specials, that means that sometimes punchlines are missing due to them being delivered by Snoopy in the original strip. And so some scenes have some build up but no real payoff. They do manage to work around it sometimes, like this bit where Peppermint Patty is looking for Snoopy, and other times they just didn't even bother. And I did kinda wish that arcs had tied together a little bit more cohesively. Like, the story starts with the first day at school, we get some school-related vignettes, then it briefly cuts to what can only be described as a cutaway gag with Sally at summer camp, before cutting back to school-related gags. I kind of feel like there needs to be some sense of progression with the gags. Like, at least have gags that feel like they're taking place at roughly the same time, because doing something like this can be disorientating to the viewer. But make no mistake, this special works more than it doesn't. Awkward moments aside, this is largely pleasant from start to finish. Some of the stories from the strips I do like and am glad they are represented here, like the one involving Peppermint Patty signing up for obedience training thinking that she's in some kind of progressive school, which is honestly both hilarious and scathing commentary. And plus, they actually did know to end with their best foot forward by including the biggest laugh at the very end. This time was showing the conclusion to the Charlie Brown stays in the hospital story arc that ends with Lucy actually holding the football for Charlie Brown, but Charlie Brown misses and kicks her hand. It's a genuinely funny bit, and the animation crew knew exactly how to bring that moment to life. Now, is this a great special? No, it doesn't do anything beyond what's expected of it. But does it deserve its status of being largely forgotten? I think that's a little harsh. I enjoyed it for what it was, and like I said, the ending alone is worth it. Although that being said, I do have to ask, did Cindy Riley, the voice of Sally, have a cold while recording her lines?
I'm too busy to talk right now. I'm moving my things into his room.
Because it sounds like she had a nasty cold while filming some of her lines. Is this goodbye, Charlie Brown? Okay, now this one. I was actually really curious about this one for a very specific purpose. So this special is actually based on a story arc from the original comics back in 1966, where Linus and Lucy both have to move away because their dad has been transferred for his job. It was originally supposed to last for several weeks or possibly even months. However, fan backlash caused Charles Schulz to end the arc early and abruptly after only lasting 2 weeks. So out of all the story arcs from the comics, this is the one that I think you could make the most compelling argument should be made into a special, with the freedom to finally do the story justice without needing to worry about fan backlash or upsetting the status quo. I was genuinely curious as to what Charles Schulz would do with this story, especially since he'd had 17 years to think of something substantive, and the result is bizarre to say the very least. Now, at first, it does progress like you'd expect. Linus and Lucy discover they're moving, they tell Charlie Brown, they have some friends over for lunch to say goodbye. There's a funny bit of Lucy giving up her psychiatry booth to a Snoopy dressed up as Sigmund Freud. And they do try and capture the sadness of a friend moving far away pretty well, initially. All the while integrating strips from the original story arc pretty organically, and actually making changes when need be. All fine stuff so far. But then we get into the second half. And this is where it completely goes into what are you doing territory. For a reason that I cannot comprehend, there's an 8 to 9 minute section of this special that's devoted to a subplot of Peppermint Patty convincing herself that Charlie Brown has asked her on a date, and waits for him to come pick her up all day, only to be quote unquote stood up. So, this might be a dumb question, but what does this have to do with the main plot? Like, at all, whether it be directly, tangentially, or even thematically. What is the purpose of this being here? Is this supposed to be a parallel of Sally doing exactly the same thing with Linus at the start of the special? Because aside from that, it literally has nothing to do with the main premise. At all. It just comes out of nowhere and hijacks the plot. You would think they could come up with something better than this, like maybe Charles Schulz could have finally utilized whatever ideas he wanted to incorporate into the original strip, but couldn't. But apparently not. Apparently there was so little to work with this special, and it needed a subplot that goes absolutely nowhere to pad out the runtime. And that's what makes this so utterly baffling to me. If he didn't have any new ideas or ways to expand the story, I don't understand why they felt the need to even adapt the story in the first place. And because the story doesn't even focus on the emotions of the characters dealing with how they feel about the Van Pelts moving away, there's never any question that they're coming back. So the emotions that they're trying to get across just feel flat. Even the emotional moments that were in the original, like the emotions of Schroeder feeling bad that he didn't get to say goodbye to Lucy, did not transfer over to the special at all. Now, aside from this peculiarity, can it be said that the special really screws up? I suppose not. I mean, yeah, Peppermint Patty and Sally are both being complete morons for not even entertaining the possibility that they may not have a date like they think they do, but aside from that, it's not like this is painful to watch. It does, on a surface level, work fine enough. I actually do really like the update to the story of Linus keeping his blanket behind for Snoopy this time around instead of Charlie Brown, and I also really like the ending of Snoopy giving it back to Linus without a hint of hesitation. It's just that, man, they really had an opportunity to do something here. Had the opportunity to correct the mistake Schulz made by caving to fan pressure and ending the arc too soon, and actually go into the emotions one might feel over a best friend moving away, or even getting the Van Pelt's perspective of what it might feel like to move away to a new town. But they just wasted it. And even if this is technically a better short than some of the other ones that had no chance of working, a wasted opportunity feels worse because you can't help but ponder, what if they had gotten it right? What if they had stuck the landing? I guess we'll never know. It's an adventure, Charlie Brown. And now in a similar vein to a Charlie Brown celebration, we have yet another special that's more or less composed of a series of comic strips, or rather arcs from the strips adapted into animated form. And this one, I think, is actually a little bit better than its predecessor. And honestly, it's for one simple reason. The composition of this one is a lot better. In the first special, the strips felt kind of random and haphazardly thrown together without much care or thought. Here, the special is a lot more deliberate about separating this into different parts. They even include different chapters for each section, so it flows a lot more smoothly. And not only that, but it spends the first 30 minutes going over 3 stories first, before it finishes out on several smaller stories, almost like the special itself is winding down, which is actually very smart pacing-wise. They also pick some really good stories that are actually pretty self-contained and don't require much context in order to understand them, which wasn't something that I could say about all the stories from the previous outing. This time around, they also decided to start with the story arc that was actually Charles Schultz's favorite storyline in the strip, and that was the Mr. Sack story. While I wouldn't say that this is the funniest storyline he ever did, it is definitely one of the more unique ones, and does go off in many unpredictable directions in a way that feels rather natural, all topped up with a hilarious ending punchline. So I can definitely understand why this is one of Schultz's favorite stories. But the rest of the stories are good too. I really enjoy the one of Marcy and Peppermint Patty becoming caddies to two older women who decide halfway through to simply forego a friendly round of golf and just start punching each other. There's not really any deeper meaning behind this one, it's just a collection of strips that are just funny. And as to be expected, some of the issues that plagued a Charlie Brown Celebration do plague this one, an occasional awkward line due to them sometimes copying lines from the strip verbatim, and some moments don't really gel together super well, like the blanket chapter is composed of two separate arcs that don't really fit together that well, but thankfully moments like these are fewer and further between this time around. But overall, I don't really have much to say about this one. It's just pleasant from start to finish, and hits the target precisely where it wants, even though it's not exactly aiming high. What have we learned, Charlie Brown? Okay, this one is by far the most unique Peanut special to date, and one that in a lot of ways I do have a tremendous amount of respect for. For starters, this is a direct sequel to Bon Voyage, Charlie Brown, and Don't Come Back, right down to even reusing animation from that film. And I do appreciate them actually making a direct sequel to that film. It's a nice treat to those that really enjoyed it, and for those that wanted the movie to soak in its Europe surroundings just a little bit more, or felt that the film ended a little too abruptly. Then this will serve as a nice little coda to that film. But it's also very clear that the special was meant to be a more mature Peanut special. For the most part, we'll come back to that in a second. The special serves as a tribute for those who died in World War II, particularly on D-Day, and the special even makes use of archival footage and rotoscoping animation in order to convey the events. The special even uses real audio of General Dwight D. Eisenhower reminiscing on the battle in order to truly encapsulate the weight of how important this was, and it was done very effectively. And the scenes themselves are appropriately sobering. They don't try to cheapen the moments with dumb jokes or asides, but rather it takes what's being said deathly serious. And prior to Saving Private Ryan, released 15 years later, this was probably one of the more high-profile pieces of media that actually went into what D-Day was and conveyed it in some capacity. And it was in a program aimed at children. And never once did I feel like they were talking down to kids. Nor did I feel like they went overboard and were being excessive just for the sake of it. It all felt very natural. Like they were letting kids be aware that it happened, but without going into all the excessive gory detail and completely destroying their innocence. And I do like that they actually let Linus be the one to give the speech. Have him be the one who discovers that the gang had stumbled onto Omaha Beach, and have him tell the other kids about it. I don't know, there's just something kind of comforting in having a character that we know and love be the one to recount an event like this. And of course, Linus is the perfect character to be giving such a speech. So sobering and harrowing, and very well done, and rather informative. Heck, even I learned a thing or two with this one. So yeah, you're probably thinking, wow, this sounds amazing. So then, why the lower rating in this case? Well, there's not a lot wrong with this one, it's mostly just one thing. But unfortunately, it's not a small thing. The one thing the special does not know how to do is juggle its tone. We can have a scene that's really slow and letting you really sink in what it's telling you, followed up almost immediately by a dumb slapstick bit of Charlie Brown getting his hand repeatedly injured by cranking the front of the rental car. Now, I would argue that there is a way to have lighter moments of comedy in between more serious scenes, even when you're dealing with a topic as serious as war, but something about the way this is handled just doesn't feel right. I don't know, maybe it's the callous attitude that the other characters feel towards Charlie Brown's suffering, while contrasting it with the stories of heroism and sacrifice that we just got through hearing about. Maybe it's the fact that they keep repeating this joke over and over again like they've struck comedic gold with it. But yeah, something about it just feels off. Now, some might think that my rating for this one is a bit harsh because, yeah, it is weird that I'm docking off a lot of points for what's really just one error, especially when I so heavily praise the rest of the special. However, I am of the opinion that if you reach something that is so great that it ends up making the mistakes stand out even more. This special was aiming for greatness, and a decent amount of it actually does succeed. But that means when it makes a mistake, it stands out like a sore thumb and drags the rest of it down as a result. When you aspire for greatness and you miss the mark, I feel like in some respects you should be judged a little bit more harshly. Yes, in terms of actual quality, this one is probably the best of the ones in this video so far. It certainly contains some of the best that we've ever seen in Peanuts, period, but the product as a whole doesn't quite reach the level of quality that it's aiming for. But let me be absolutely clear. This is definitely a special that you should check out. This is something unique for Peanuts that still feels like it belongs. You have to give the creators credit for wanting to pay tribute to real-life soldiers and succeeding at the actual scenes that do serve as tributes. And like I said, it is informative, but not really in an insulting way like a lot of forced kids' entertainment can be. In many respects, this actually feels like a prototype of the This Is America Charlie Brown miniseries that would be released 5 years later, and I think did showcase that Peanuts as a franchise was capable of tackling more serious topics. But this is a prime example of me wishing something was greater as a whole than it actually is. It's Flashbeagle, Charlie Brown. Ah yes, the Peanut special that's a semi-parody of an R-rated film about a female welder who also does exotic dancing at night. Because I remember when I first saw Flashdance, the first thing I thought to myself was, yeah, there needs to be a Peanut special about this. Okay, I'm being a little facetious here. The two actually have very little in common other than the namesake and the fact that there's a scene of Snoopy going dancing at night. And hey, Flashdance was a monster hit back in the day, so why not try to reference something that was so popular back in the day? And it's not like they just threw the name into the title and called it a day. They actually did go the extra mile and hired Maureen Jahan, the stunt dancer who actually worked on Flashdance, and recorded her dancing, and then rotoscoped Snoopy on top of her for his big number at the end. So you definitely can't say that this was merely a lazy cash grab. Much like some of the other Peanut specials around this time, this one forgoes telling a traditional narrative, but rather is little more than an excuse to string together 4 Peanuts-inspired 80s music videos. And if that's a niche that you would love to see filled, then this absolutely 100% delivers. Now, of course, this does create some issues like you would expect. The pacing in this is really disjointed and it doesn't feel like all these pieces really go together. On top of that, there's like a 3-minute stretch that's focused entirely on Peppermint Patty and Marcy in school that doesn't have anything to do with music or dancing at all, so I was left wondering why they even bothered to include it at all. But that's kind of the way the special works. It'll have something music related, it'll include an interlude that either barely relates to the plot, if at all, before jumping into the next musical number. And the special itself does operate on kind of music video logic. For example, why does one of the kids in Sally's class pull out a boombox and just start playing it while she's doing show and tell? So that there's music for Snoopy to dance to. That's why. Now, I should mention the songs in the special itself are actually pretty good for the most part, which really shouldn't be a surprise considering they were written by Ed Bogus and Desiree Goyette, a duo that also did work on several excellent songs on the Garfield specials and Garfield and Friends. Peppermint Patty's PE program is a nice, energized little piece, and Lucy Says is a really catchy beat. And in fact, this one was so catchy that as soon as it started playing, it actually reawakened some old forgotten memories, reminding me that I had in fact seen the special before when I was a kid. Flashbeagle is okay and does its job of capturing the feel of the music of Flashdance, although it doesn't really stand out much on its own. The one song that I think isn't all that great is the Pigpen Hoedown. Not only because it just sounds like a stereotypical hoedown, but it's way too short and is more or less the same joke repeated 3 times. Now, the special as a whole isn't necessarily my cup of tea. Like I said, it's a bit too structurally disjointed for my taste, but I can definitely see the appeal of this one. If you're one of those people that just want to see a Peanut special that's basically just music videos loosely strung together, then you'll get exactly what you're looking for here. It's likable and has some good energy about itself. You definitely can't point at anything and go, wow, that was done so absolutely terribly. And At the bare minimum, this one does act as a time capsule of the 1980s, probably more so than any other Peanuts product there is. One final note about this that doesn't really have anything to do with the quality of the special itself, but someone pointed out to me on my Letterboxd page, is that the voice of Linus in the special, Jeremy Schoenberg, is a really good shouter. You can hear it right during this scene where Sally keeps saying Linus is going to ask her to dance.
I did not!
Kids shouting or screaming is something that is very, very difficult to sound both natural and not grating on the ears, and this one manages to hit both. Like I said, it doesn't really affect the score on this one. I just wanted to give credit where credit is due. Snoopy's Getting Married, Charlie Brown. Another special that takes a storyline directly from the comic strip pages. This one is simultaneously the easiest and yet hardest to give my opinion on. Here's what I mean. Really, the big problem with this special is an easy one to identify, but at the same time, trying to unravel it seems like it's going to be a challenge because of how pervasive the problem is. And not only that, but the positives and the negatives are also intertwined, almost like this thing is analogous to trying to untangle one giant wad of Christmas lights stored in the attic. So let's start with the easy part. The pacing for this special is atrocious. It jumps around all over the place and goes off on tangents that do not need to be there, and I feel like even that doesn't really explain the sheer scope of this problem. But at the same time, some of the individual elements work really well, just not really when put back to back. Okay, I'm going to try to explain this more linearly so that you can see what I'm talking about. So the special starts off with a subplot about Peppermint Patty wanting Snoopy to watch her house, but he gets spooked away, so she forces Charlie Brown to come over and finish the job. This is adapted straight from the comics and actually does work in some pretty funny moments. But then Snoopy comes back and randomly he's somehow come across a poodle and they've decided they want to get married. Keep in mind, we have not seen any trace of this poodle beforehand, so this comes right out of nowhere. Then we get this scene of Charlie Brown sending off a wedding invitation to Snoopy's brother Spike, who actually makes his debut appearance in the special. And we get Charlie Brown's inner monologue as he does so, more or less repeating the exact same information that had just been relayed to us. Then we get a scene of Snoopy recounting his day with the poodle, and we see they literally just reuse the character model of Fifi from Life as a Circus Charlie Brown, which kind of begs the question of why they didn't just bother to, making them the same character. It would have made this quick proposal make way more sense, but whatever. Then we cut to yet another subplot of Spike trying to earn enough money so that he can make it to Snoopy's wedding, including him making his way to a dog race and actually competing in a race. This scene lasts 3 minutes and has zero effect on the narrative. Then we just get some wedding shenanigans. We get some jokes, some of them work, some of them don't. Then Spike arrives and meets the bride, and then kisses her paw like this. And the scene is presented like this is supposed to be foreshadowing of the bride to be running off with him instead of Snoopy like he did in the original comic strip, but he doesn't, so the scene is completely pointless. Then Snoopy has his bachelor party, and it's here where he finally starts to have some doubts about getting married. And to be fair, we actually do get some really funny reactions out of him here. Then the wedding happens, but everyone is left standing around while they wait for the bride to show up, until Lucy arrives to inform the wedding party that the poodle had run off with some golden retriever that we had never seen nor heard of prior, without really any reason being given for why she did so. Then a relieved Snoopy eats the wedding cake and salad with Woodstock by his side, while Spike just watches them, and then the special just ends. Like I said, it's really hard to actually convey just how disjointed and lopsided the special feels while you're watching it. It genuinely feels like stuff is just happening. There's very little to no setup to the events, so the story just feels flat. And yeah, even other Peanut specials could be kind of meandering at times, but something about the way it's done here just doesn't work that well. But at the same time, I also have to acknowledge that this does have some genuine good moments in it. There were more than a few moments where I actually laughed. Even though the story has nothing to do with the main plot, I enjoyed the opening bit of Snoopy failing to guard Peppermint Patty's house, and the bit of Spike participating in a dog race. So it's like, even though objectively the script is a mess, I can't really get mad at it, partially because the tangents are actually more entertaining than the actual core story. The result is yet another completely watchable Peanut special that is, once again, failing to connect all of its pieces. I'm starting to sense a trend here. But out of all the Peanut specials out there so far, this is by far the biggest mixed bag that has ever been mixed or bagged. Also, even though once again I know this isn't going to bother anyone else, but during one scene, Linus mentions that he's going to be officiating the wedding, which is fine, that does make sense. But then he says he's going to quote from John 2:1, which just says, "On the third day there was a marriage in Cana in Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there." Like, I get the reference to the marriage in the verse and it's a wedding, but this is merely descriptive text saying that a wedding was taking place, not instructive text about the roles and duties of a husband and wife, or even just verses about love. Not exactly the kind of verse that a pastor would quote at a wedding, unless Linus was saying that he was going to recite the entire passage, in which case he would be reciting the miracle of Jesus turning water into wine, since that's when it occurred, but again, for what purpose? There's nothing prescriptive about the text. Yes, I know, this is a small detail, and I probably spent too much time talking about it, but I don't care. It bothers me. Also, as a neat little bit of trivia, Sally Brown in the special is voiced by Fergie. Yes, that Fergie. Black Eyed Peas Fergie. And they even have a scene of her singing a song at Snoopy's wedding. I don't know what to do with this information, so I'll just let you make of that what you will. You're a good man, Charlie Brown. This special is nothing more than an animated abridgment of the Broadway musical, and you can definitely understand why they wanted to make this. I mean, in theory, this stage play should translate very well to the animation medium. And yeah, from a story and animation standpoint, it does. The stage play didn't really have a flowing narrative and was more just a series of humorous vignettes with songs about some aspect of the Peanuts lore, like Charlie Brown trying to fly a kite, them trying to play a baseball game, or even a song just about happiness as defined by a child. But hey, since a lot of the specials were already so vignette focused in the first place, this isn't exactly a stretch to adapt. And in fact, sometimes the animation can do things the stage play can't do. Like having Imagine spots instead of just having the characters monologuing about said Imagine spot on stage. There's just one problem with this. One teensy-weensy little problem. It's kind of a subtle one, but okay, see if you can figure out what the problem is while I play some of these clips that I selected for no particular reason.
Peter Rabbit did sorta that kind of thing too. I was the manager, Schroeder was catcher, and all of the team was the same. Gotta get this stupid kite to fly. Would you please send directions? Peter Rabbit.
Yeah, these kids can't sing. Okay, that's a little bit too harsh. It's not that these kids can't sing. Sometimes they can. It's that they are not experienced enough to handle these songs as written. These songs were originally written to be performed by adults live on stage. They were not written with kids in mind. So some of these notes are really difficult to hit. The poor actor who plays Charlie Brown, Kevin Brando, is clearly struggling the most, and unfortunately, he has the most amount of lines sung. Because of this, some of these songs are really difficult to get through. Book Report, TEAM, and The Kite are painful to listen to, which is a shame because those are some of my favorite songs in the whole musical. Out of the kids, the one who's actually the best singer is, ironically, Jessica Lee Smith as Lucy. And I say ironically because in the revival at least, Lucy is actually supposed to be a really bad singer. And it actually makes it even more apparent that the kids are struggling with the songs when you compare them to, say, Robert Towers' portrayal of Snoopy. Okay, so I've put off talking about it long enough. As many of you are probably aware, this is the very first time that we've ever had an animated version of Snoopy that talks, or rather, we can hear his internal monologue. And yeah, as you would expect, it's really distracting. I mean, we've had 28 specials prior to this and 4 feature films where Snoopy's appeared without any dialogue. And to suddenly be able to hear him speak is actually even more jarring than hearing the adults speak. Plus, it doesn't help that the voice doesn't really match what I think a lot of us would think that Snoopy would sound like. But you do eventually get used to it, so I don't think it's that big a deal. But more to the point, Robert Towers, compared to the other voice actors, can actually hit the notes that he's supposed to without struggling, which actually makes the moments of bad singing from the kids stand out all the more. So yeah, the bad moments are bad and they do distract, and I was fully prepared to give this a 6 out of 10. But then the special hits you with its rendition of Happiness. And yeah, it's a good rendering of the number. Here, maybe because the song is more quiet and ballad-like, the kids actually feel more relaxed with the material. And so they actually do a really good job here. Plus, I'm sorry, this is just one of my favorite songs ever. It's a song that just perfectly captures the essence of childhood in a way that so few songs are able to do. So yeah, parts of this are really rough to get through, and I'm not going to pretend that they aren't. But going out on as high a note as this one did will go a long way with me. I will be able to completely understand if someone says they can't get through this, but in my opinion, it's worth getting through those moments in order to get to the great stuff. Happy New Year, Charlie Brown. This is yet another Peanut special that has garnered itself a rather infamous reputation among fans, particularly when it comes to the cruelty directed towards Charlie Brown. So let's get this element out of the way first. Yeah, even by the standards of Peanuts, this one can get pretty mean. I mean, the entire premise is predicated on an elementary school teacher assigning the kids in her class War and Peace to read over winter break. Actually, let me rephrase that. Assigns it specifically to Charlie Brown and seemingly to no one else. Now, that's not confirmed, and in fact, lines of dialogue seem to imply that the teacher did in fact give the assignment to all the other kids, but we don't see any of the other kids stressing about the book report, particularly Linus, who is the only other confirmed kid to be in the same class as Charlie Brown in this special. Although this bit of dialogue here seems to imply that Linus has already read the book prior to the assignment, and therefore didn't need to read it again, even though they don't really make that clear. I really don't think the writers meant to imply that Charlie Brown was the only one who had to do the assignment, but that is how it comes across to a lot of viewers, and I can understand why. So on one hand, I should get mad at this because this is a case of the writers not really doing a good job at conveying what they're trying to convey, but on the other hand, I actually think it kind of makes it funnier. I mean, this certainly wouldn't be the first time that Charlie Brown got singled out in this manner. Think the trick-or-treat scene in It's the Great Pumpkin, Charlie Brown. And while yes, there is not a single teacher on planet Earth that would assign an 8-year-old kid to read War and Peace in any capacity, it does fit snugly into the motif of the universe being seemingly out to get Charlie Brown for no reason. Plus, unlike the cruelty in the also infamous It's Your First Kiss, Charlie Brown, it's not internally illogical. So it's nowhere near the same level of frustration that special had. Plus, I actually think the special is funny. I love the scene of Charlie Brown trying to deliver an invitation to the little red-haired girl, but his hand gets stuck in the mail slot. I love the scene of Linus trying to guilt-trip Charlie Brown into reading War and Peace by recounting the true story of how Leo Tolstoy's wife, Sophia, had to copy War and Peace from beginning to end 7 times at night by candlelight with a dip pen. I love the scene of Linus trying to get Rerun to stop blowing up square balloons. And I love the scene of Snoopy sniffing Lucy's root beer, and she, of course, overreacts and knows that her root beer must be covered in dog germs, and proves her point by pouring it out on a saucer and looking at it with her binoculars. This scene alone is one of the funniest scenes that has been in any Peanut special of the past several years. And as an added bonus is actually a nice callback to the very first Peanut special, but without feeling like a rehash. Now, it's not perfect. There are things about it that don't work. Like, for some reason, they opted to show the little red-haired girl again, despite the fact that, unlike It's Your First Kiss, Charlie Brown, there is literally no reason to show her. Plus, it is also weird that Linus decided he was going to dance with her himself, despite the fact that he knew Charlie Brown was the one that invited her, and just offers up the excuse of, I couldn't find you anywhere, as if that somehow made it okay. And some of the voice actors seem higher pitched than normal for some reason, particularly that of Linus and Peppermint Patty. But overall, I do enjoy this one. Out of all the specials they've made that isn't simply made up of old comic strips, this is one of the better ones they've had in quite some time. So, that's it for part 3, more than halfway through now. So, yeah, as you probably noticed, there was, I feel, a real downgrade for this era. For the most part, with a handful of exceptions, there was just this kind of feeling of apathy, almost like the crew didn't really feel like making these anymore, but felt obligated to do so. Pretty much all of these have something in them that doesn't feel quite right, or they made specials out of premises that they shouldn't have. Both Someday You'll Find Her and Is This Goodbye, Charlie Brown are the clearest examples of that. But still, there are flashes of passion in here. Probably the one you can tell they put the most effort into is What Have We Learned, Charlie Brown. You can tell that that was one that the creators were really passionate about making. But yeah, overall, I don't think the 80s were a particularly great era for the Peanuts franchise, at least in terms of animation. But aside from one special, I don't think it was ever bad. But overall, generally speaking, it's a string of cartoons that I just felt kinda lukewarm about. But okay, that was this time. What does next time look like? Well, we're going to wrap up the specials that were made in Charles Schulz's lifetime, and because we've already run out of holidays, we're getting new holiday specials for both Christmas and Valentine's Day. It'll be hard to top the masterpieces that we've already got, but we'll see what they do with them. We'll also take a look at the second animated adaptation of a Peanuts off-Broadway musical that I didn't even know existed, called Snoopy the Musical. And we'll also take a look at the special that Charles Schulz was absolutely certain would be the magnum opus for the entire Peanuts franchise. It's The Girl in the Red Truck, Charlie Brown. And then immediately follow it up with what a lot of people consider to be the Peanuts' actual magnum opus, Why Charlie Brown Why? I have been waiting to talk about these for quite some time, and that time is almost here. But until then, I guess that's it for now. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to be notified of when part 4 comes out, make sure that you're subscribed so that you don't miss it. Anyway, have a good day, and I'll see you next time.